President Trump asked the Supreme Court to weigh in on whether he can use the Emergency Powers Act to impose sweeping tariffs after an appeals court upheld an earlier ruling that found it unconstitutional. For more on the future of trade policy, I want to bring in Ben Werschel, Yahoo Finance Washington correspondent, and Henrietta Treyz. She is a Veda Partners managing partner and director of economic policy. So Ben, let's start with you. What is at stake with this decision right now?
Yeah, morning, Jared. Yeah, there is a lot at stake here with this decision. The underlying question is the legality of Trump's so-called IEEPA tariffs, which is a huge chunk of the $180 billion plus that the Trump administration that's been brought in by the government this fiscal year. At stake is not just whether these tariffs can continue, but there's even a scenario here where the Trump administration is forced to offer refunds if it's found that these tariffs were put in place illegally and so that they shouldn't have been collected in the first place. So that would cause a lot of chaos in any scenario if these tariffs are struck down. The Trump administration priority at the moment is speed. That's what this petition to the Supreme Court that was formally sent last night is about. It's about getting the decision done, not just getting the decision done, but getting it done quickly, as opposed to the sort of full Supreme Court decision-making process that could stretch things out into next spring. The Trump administration wants this to be handled quickly, a decision to be coming quickly, and the Trump himself has said he's confident of a victory there. Whether he gets his way on this speed question is a much more open question. I've been looking at some Supreme Court experts this morning, and they note that a rapid-fire decision, as opposed to rapid-fire moving on an injunction, is a pretty rare thing. There needs to be usually a pretty hard and fast deadline. The big example there would be Bush v. Gore, when the Supreme Court decided on that election because there was a clear deadline there with Inauguration Day approaching. So what the Supreme Court decides to do here remains to be seen, but Trump is already floating that if it doesn't go his way, he may need to sort of redo his whole trade policy, including the unwinding of trade deals we've seen from Japan to Europe and South Korea.
Henrietta, I want to bring you in here. We were just listening to Ben kind of outline and game out the potential scenarios. I want to know your opinion of how you see this going and what could happen, what could swing things either way.
Well, the Supreme Court ordinarily wouldn't even hear this case because the Court of International Trade and the Court of Appeals have both reached the same conclusion, which is that Trump doesn't have the authority. No president has the authority under the 1977 International Economic Power Emergency Act. So there is a plain precedent for the administration never using these tariffs, Congress not having given the president taxation authority here, and especially not on the sweeping scale that he has imposed over what has been, decades-long issues for the United States in terms of trade deficits. So the cut and dry answer is that the Supreme Court is likely to find on the legal question that the president doesn't have the authority to impose these tariffs. Moreover, they've also decided in the last couple of months that, and when a president acts too aggressively, it violates the major questions doctrine and says basically the president is asking outside of his purview. He's not in his lane anymore. Congress needs to decide these things. So my base case with 50 to 65% odds is that the Supreme Court will side with the two lower courts and say the president doesn't have this authority. You can see from the president's filings with the Solicitor General that they're trying to say, look, don't even limit it. Don't make it a short-term tariff. Don't make it applicable in only certain instances. We want this wide latitude, and that goes to the heart of the major questions doctrine. So my base case is that sectors are going to get really aggressively hit in the next couple of months as the IEEPA authority is overruled. And that's where we need to concentrate. Furniture, lumber, timber, aircraft, trucking, pharma, semis, that's what's going to get hit in the immediate aftermath of this court case. And
I'm glad you brought that up because that leads to my follow-up here. The next question is, what happens if the Supreme Court decides not to hear this and the lower courts their rulings are upheld here, their decisions are upheld? What are these businesses to do? What can they expect? How long is it going to take for the Treasury to return some of this money?
Yeah, man, it would be wild if the Supreme Court just rejected the president out of hand. The base case expectation is that Justice Roberts will not do that, and they will take up this case, and we'll get a conclusion, as Ben suggests, by November, December of this year, as opposed to February or March of next year. So they are moving quickly. It's a $4 trillion question. So this is obviously very critical. The plaintiffs in the case, which are domestic importers, companies selling learning materials to students and children, for example, all these domestic U.S. companies who import products from abroad. just like John Deere would in terms of steel and aluminum, importing it from abroad. You see the impact that it's having on John Deere and Caterpillar and those companies right now who are forced to pay these massive tariffs. They want their money back. If these are illegal tariffs, they want their money back. And by the way, they want interest. So this is roughly 150 to maybe even $300 billion worth of refunds that the Treasury would be required to dole out. It'll be very complicated and probably won't be sorted out for months to come.
All right, and then the second part of that is, what are Trump's options if the Supreme Court either doesn't hear it or rejects the ability for him to charge these tariffs? I understand that he can still legally charge or implement tariffs on specific sectors to up to a certain percentage. How could that play out?
Well, there are a couple different options. The Section 232, the national security tariffs, are already in place. I mentioned that on steel and aluminum. Those are 50%. All those pieces can stay. Whole nations could be exposed to Section 301 investigations. The China tariffs are in place across $550 billion worth of goods. About $350 billion worth of goods are tariffed under 301 already. He can just migrate those quickly. For the rest of it, though, which is about 70% of that $4 trillion number I mentioned earlier, that would be best addressed if Congress were to actually give the president this authority and say, hey, yeah, we actually do want you to tariff every single import to the United States and tax the average family $2,700 per year. Here is that authority. And they could do that. The Republican conference could give the president that authority. That's what he'll want, and that's what he'll be asking for. And a good legislative vehicle for that would be the reconciliation package that they could begin writing on October 1st. So our advice to clients is watch the House and Senate Republican conference and see if the president is going to compel the Republican Party to vote for taxes on all consumers at these very high 50, 60% rates, which is what the current IEEPA tariffs are collecting from Vietnam, South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia. Those very high tariff rates are in place there. And Congress could give them the authority if they just say yes.
Well, we'll be on pins and needles here. Ben, I want to circle back to you on a slightly different topic, because tonight in the Rose Garden at the White House, the president is welcoming top business, political, and tech leaders. We don't have an official guest list that I understand, but Mark Zuckerberg is supposed to be there, Sam Altman of OpenAI. What do you know about this event, and how could it shape things, the tech discussion and the relationship between the tech industry and the White House?
Yeah, so this is going to be the first kind of gathering of Trump's remodeled Rose Garden. He paved over the lawn and made it into a patio, kind of made it into a lot of echoes of Mar-a-Lago. And as you mentioned, tech is the very first kind of guest list here. Trump has been planning for a party for a couple of weeks now, and then it's there. A couple other names for you. I think you mentioned Zuckerberg. Bill Gates is apparently on the guest list. Apple CEO Tim Cook. This is according to an invite list that the Hill obtained first, but has since been confirmed by the White House. So it's going to be a real tech gathering. Exactly what it is, we don't know. It's right now it's closed to the press, so I don't know that we're going to get remarks, but it's also coming as Melania Trump has an AI event today that I think a lot of these same CEOs will be at. So kind of a tech-focused day and an unveiling for Trump of this. The White House statement being distributed to reporters is calling this the Rose Garden Club. I'm saying top business, political, and tech leaders for this dinner will be in attendance, calling it the new beautiful Rose Garden patio. So Trump's definitely looking to show off this patio, and he's using tech as his big first way to do it.
The new beautiful Rose Garden patio. Well, we'll wait for that tonight. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Henrietta.